December 24th, 2008, Covina, California. A family is gathered in their home on a quaint Christmas Eve night. Like many families the night before Christmas, they have gathered to spend time with their loved ones and to make memories. However, on Christmas Eve in 2008, one family in Covina, California would be shattered, broken, and barbarically slain in a story so wild and so horrific, you gotta hear it to believe it. This family, the Ortega family, would be paid a visit by a man hell-bent on revenge in a Santa costume, all while being armed to the teeth. Today on Unblurring the Unknown, we dive into the life and story of the Ortega family and Bruce Pardo, a man who would later be known and responsible for the Covina Christmas Massacre. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. As always, I am your host, Dominic, and I just want to start it off today's episode with this statement. Very often on this show, we discuss some pretty crazy stuff, and some truly startling true crime topics, and some of which are right up there when it comes to the horrors of what humans can do to other humans, and today's topic is no different. Now, when I first stumbled upon this topic, I wanted to do something different for the holiday season, and when I found this story, this just perhaps happened to be one of the most twisted stories from start to finish that I've ever heard of. And I think it's important that this story gets shared because of the type of person that Bruce Pardo was. And of course, I will explain all about Bruce Pardo in the episode. But let me be clear, you are talking about the epitome of human scum. And that goes without saying. He was the embodiment of a real-life monster. And to commit the acts that he did during the time of the year when everything should be about spending time with family and indulging in the holiday season and doing things that make you happy. Instead, Bruce Pardo stripped an entire family of that because of his sick and twisted brain and process he had to try and get revenge. And it's honestly a very sad and disturbing story start to finish, so I am kind of giving you this disclaimer now. If this is something that you might not be interested in, or if these type of topics are sensitive to you, I just want to give you that kind of disclaimer right out of the gate. But of course, it is a Christmas season, and that was part of the reason for doing this episode, doing a Christmas-oriented episode, and it just happened to be that true crime was the next topic kind of on my rotation that I do. So obviously I found this one, and I wanted to cover it for this week. Now, how this episode is going to go is that we're first going to set the stage with who this story revolves around, Bruce Pardo, the type of person he was, and a little bit of his life and events leading up to Christmas Eve of 2008. We will then go into the events of that day, the killings themselves, and the aftermath of those said killings. Unfortunately, like most episodes, there will not be a theory section in this episode because, of course, we know who committed the crime in this case. There's no unsolved murder or missing person or anything like that. We know who did this. It was Bruce Pardo. So there's no theories. So that is a outlier in terms of a lot of my other episodes. But I just want to throw that out there. But of course, as always, I will still offer my personal thoughts on the story and the case in general. Now, in doing my research, and often with serial killer cases or mass murderers, those who have been around the killer before they became the killer might say things like, for example, oh, they were always pleasant and friendly, or, maybe that they never came off as someone who would commit the horrifying acts they would go on to commit. And from what I read, Bruce Pardo was the same way. But behind the scenes, for those who knew him, painted a much different picture. Little is known about Bruce Pardo's childhood and upbringing, but what we do know about Bruce is that he was raised in the San Fernando Valley area of California and was a graduate of the John H. Francis Polytechnic High School in Sun Valley, Los Angeles, and went on to attend college at California State University, Northridge. Now, Bruce was a very smart student and scholar, and through his work, he was actually able to get a job at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is now currently owned by NASA. He worked there at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory for many years and actually carved out a very successful career for himself. However, outside of the workplace, his reputation was split. Those who knew Bruce thought that he was a kind and very nice individual, while people who had relationships with Bruce didn't really agree with that. Bruce, behind closed doors, was a very frugal and cheap individual when it came to spending money on other people, and this also transitioned into his lack of care for others. Now, according to the Murder in America podcast, in Bruce's very first marriage, he had actually left his bride at the altar and never contacted her again, and left her to pay for the entirety of the wedding expenses. Now, the reason for this is kind of unknown, but I did want to mention that, as that kind of establishes the type of person that Bruce Pardo was. To be in a committed relationship with someone, to plan on getting married, to get married practically, just to leave that person at the altar and with the entire bill, to pay for the entire wedding when she didn't even get married, is kind of very scummy and a very low-life thing to do. But outside of work, Bruce was still a recognizable person to his neighbors, and he always said hello to them. And many who knew him thought that he was very outgoing and personable, and kind of said that he kind of always wanted to be the center of attention, and that's just kind of how his personality was. Which, obviously, being the center of attention and trying to be that way can, of course, be interpreted in a variety of ways. On Sundays, Bruce would offer to usher at his local church, and many of his fellow churchgoers raved about Bruce and had nothing but kind things to say about him, which is in stark contrast to the crimes he would go on to commit, and how he treated his marriages and his partners. In 2004, he met Sylvia Orza. They initially hit it off, and Sylvia brought into the relationship 3 children from a previous marriage. Although Sylvia wasn't looking for a relationship at the time she met Bruce, that would quickly change. She was drawn to Bruce's personality, and at this point in both of their lives, they were older, and Sylvia and Bruce both thought that it wasn't a terrible thing to settle down and create a life for themselves. And of course, Sylvia looked at Bruce like a older bachelor who on the surface was kind and very thoughtful and caring of her and her 3 children. After 2 years of dating, Sylvia and Bruce would get married in 2006. Bruce was a natural parent to Sylvia's children, even though he was supposedly a bachelor with no children of his own. Now, I want you to keep that statement in mind, as that does show back up here in our story very momentarily. After the two had gotten married, Bruce's attitude abruptly changed. His attitude towards the kids was poor, and often said even though he and Sylvia were married, it was still her responsibility to take care of them. Bruce, of course, had a very well-paying job and had been making 6 figures of an income for quite some time between his early career at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and later at ITT Corporation Electronics Systems Radar Systems, which, that's a name right there. That's a name for a business right there. That's probably the best one that I've heard. But for general context, for the rest of the episode, I'm just going to call it ITT Systems, because that's a lot fucking shorter than ITT Corporation Electronic Systems Radar Systems. Just abbreviate the whole thing. Just make it an acronym. Don't do the whole name. It's tough to read. But regardless with my jokes, Bruce was very well off. He was making 6 figures, and he was single, and had relatively no additional responsibilities to pay for. So he had spent his extra income on toys for himself, like additional vehicles and even a boat. And by the time he and Sylvia had gotten married, they had actually moved out of Bruce's smaller home and into a much bigger and well-off one that was roughly worth $500,000 at the time. Now, again, Sylvia was not making as much money as Bruce. And obviously, when you get married, there's kind of that establishment between the two partners that, hey, we are in this together, we have to pool our resources and kind of do what's best. And initially, before they had gotten married, of course, Sylvia said that he was a great father, to these 3 children of Sylvia's. Even though he wasn't the father, he was he was a natural parent. So she thought that those behaviors were going to navigate their way into when they got married, and that, of course, was not the case. Now, building on the income part of this, Bruce had no interest in setting up a joint marriage savings account with him and Sylvia. Of course, most couples do this, and that's not very uncommon. And his attitude towards not doing this was very telling. He was very not for this, and on the surface you might think that he is just cheap and not wanting to provide for his new family, and that very well could be right. But of course, all of these details will come full circle here. Now, Bruce did actually make Sylvia contribute to a savings account in his name, from what I could find. So after Sylvia had actually contributed to this savings account, with Sylvia's much lower income, she wasn't really left with much to splurge on her kids or have luxuries for her own. Now, Sylvia was only working as a secretary, and I think she was only making, from what I could find, somewhere in the 30s in terms of $30,000 a year, whereas Bruce was making a six-figure income. That I established. So Bruce was able to afford all of these toys and boats and cars and all this nice things, while Sylvia was left with really nothing after contributing to this savings account and to taking care of her kids. She didn't really have any money left to spend on herself. Now, while Bruce's six-figure income remained untouched and he was able to afford all of these lavish things, Sylvia, in the meantime, felt like she was being taken advantage of, and rightfully so. I would feel the exact same way if I was in that situation. Now, 18 months into the marriage and Sylvia being dissatisfied, Bruce's mother, in a conversation with Sylvia, accidentally let it slip that Bruce had actually fathered a child within a previous marriage. This, of course, came as a massive shock to Sylvia, and she confronted Bruce about it. Now, it wasn't the son part that Sylvia was disturbed about. It had turned out that this son he had fathered with a previous woman named Elena would be left high and dry by Bruce. The son, named Matthew, was 13 months old when Elena would head out of the house and leave Matthew in the care of Bruce for the time being. During this time, Bruce was oblivious to his son and let him play outside, unsupervised, while he watched TV. Now, you cannot, in any way, shape, or form, leave your child unsupervised, especially in a backyard of all places, while you just, sat on your ass and watched TV. Like, you can't. Toddlers, and especially a 13-month-old baby, you cannot leave them unattended like that. Again, this child is practically not even a toddler, and yet Bruce decided to leave him unsupervised when a variety of things could happen, and they unfortunately did. Now, when Elena returned home, she found Bruce cradling the motionless body of Matthew in his arms. It turns out that during Bruce's negligence, Matthew had managed to fall into their swimming pool. Matthew was airlifted to a nearby hospital, and they tried tirelessly to resuscitate him. Bruce stayed by Matthew's bedside for days on end, and when he wasn't watching over Matthew, he was reportedly staring blankly at the hospital walls. Now, of course, I can only imagine the thoughts and feelings in that room at this moment, what Bruce was feeling like. And I also have to imagine he was feeling like the worst parent. And unfortunately, as this story is trending, it does not have a happy ending. The doctors came to Bruce and Elena with news about Matthew's prognosis. They were able to save the boy's life, but because of him being unconscious and the lack of oxygen to his brain, the boy would be paralyzed and most likely require round-the-clock care for the rest of his life. Now, this was obviously heartbreaking news to Bruce and Elena, and the next day after hearing this news, Bruce suddenly broke up with Elena and abandoned her and his child and left Elena with the over $350,000 medical bill from their son's care in the hospital. What a piece of shit. Now, Elena wasn't able to recover any money from Bruce and was forced to sue his homeowner's insurance company to get just some money back, and she did, and she was successful, and she got some money, but that only covered a fraction of the total bill. After this whole event, Bruce never contacted Elena or Matthew again. Now, I did initially say that Sylvia found all of this out through Bruce's mother, but I also found another report saying that she found this out in his taxes when he listed Matthew as a dependent, even though he never paid a lick of child support. So, in a nutshell, he was exploiting his disabled son for a tax break. We are learning, as the minutes go by, what a horrible human being Bruce Pardo is, and again, the unfortunate thing is that this story does not get any better. And after all of this unfolded with Sylvia and Bruce, I have to imagine Sylvia was feeling absolutely blindsided and disgusted with this news, and rightfully so. Sylvia would go on to move into a separate bedroom within their house, and divorce proceedings started, and after 2 years of marriage, Bruce and Sylvia would divorce in March of 2008. Now, even though they divorced, Sylvia had asked Bruce if she and her children could still stay in the home with him until the end of the school year so that they wouldn't have to move and switch schools. Surprisingly, Bruce agreed. However, that coming weekend when Sylvia and her kids left to attend a birthday party of a relative, Bruce tossed all of Sylvia's and the children's belongings into the driveway of the home and changed the locks to his house, effectively kicking Sylvia out onto the street. Now, during the divorce proceedings, Sylvia had requested $3,166 a month for spousal support and fees related to money to pay the attorney. In addition to this, she wanted the money that she had contributed to this group savings account with Bruce, and by the time of the divorce, $88,000 had accrued in it. Now, when she went to withdraw the half that she had put in the savings account, Bruce had drained the account to just $17,000, effectively stealing her half from her. All while this happened, the judge actually ordered Bruce to pay $1,785 monthly to Sylvia for spousal support. So even though it wasn't the initial amount Sylvia wanted, it was still a considerable amount of money monthly. But if we know anything about Bruce, he wasn't going to pay it, and he didn't. The first check from Bruce bounced, and Sylvia didn't ever receive another check after that. To add insult to injury, during this time, Bruce also lost his job at ITT Systems due to pay discrepancies in what he was billing his clients for, aka falsifying his time card and charging unnecessary payments for work his clients didn't receive, also known as fraud, and he was fired. Now, he tried to file for state unemployment, but was denied, meaning he had no income coming in anymore, and icing on the cake, he had $31,000 in credit card debt accrued as well. Again, that is just talking about a man who has now had his life considerable spiral out of control because of his terrible actions that you really have no one to blame for except for yourself. However, all while this was going on, Bruce somehow found the money to buy some 9mm handguns. And since California law at the time allowed you to only buy one gun every 30 days, he bought the first gun shortly after the divorce proceedings and then bought another one in 4 consecutive months up to kind of the September-October timeframe. So he ended up buying one in June, July, August, and then he actually skipped a month and bought one right at the end of September and into October. If, again, my research is correct. I kind of saw different reports on when he bought these handguns, but he bought 4, if not 5, all within different months after the divorce proceedings. Now, during the following court hearings for his alimony payments, Bruce played the victim, saying that he got no severance from his previous job after being terminated, and that he couldn't file for unemployment, and that he had no way to pay. And that even though he had several job interviews, no one would hire him. Well, that doesn't surprise me, because when you steal from your fucking employer, that usually doesn't end up very well for your future career aspirations. Now, in the extended divorce proceedings, Bruce was allowed to keep his home, while Sylvia was awarded $10,000 from Bruce, the wedding rings, and the family dog. Now, Bruce would try and flip this narrative back on Sylvia by trying to say that she was taking these lavish vacations since she didn't have to pay rent and that she was living back home with her parents, and that she was going out and buying, cars and, again, taking lavish vacations, and that he shouldn't have to pay this money. And that it actually should be the other way around, that Sylvia should be paying him money. Now, Sylvia, again, like I mentioned, was living at home, so she wasn't paying rent, obviously, but she was financing a new car. But the claims about lavish vacations were completely untrue, and just her spending all of this money that he had given her is just factual, because Sylvia did not have this money. Again, she was just financing a new car, she wasn't taking lavish vacations, and any effort by Bruce made to try and get money out of Sylvia was ultimately denied. And believe it or not, he would actually go on to buy another handgun in November, and during this time period, he would actually talk to a costume tailor about getting a custom Santa suit made. Obviously, at first, the costume tailor thought it was strange as he was ordering it so far away from Christmas, but he made the suit anyway for Bruce's measurements. Of course, kind of business is business. It might be a little bit late or kind of out from Christmas, but, well, you want a Santa suit, business is business. All right, I'll take your money. Now, over the period of months after the divorce proceedings, Bruce was plotting his revenge, and his revenge was planned, and it involved his guns, the Santa suit, and back in the intro, I kind of established where this was going to go. Now, including this, Bruce would actually go on to take a trip to a friend's house who lived over in Iowa, and while spending time in Iowa, he would visit a gun store where he would purchase multiple 18 round magazines, which exceeded the legal magazine limit in California at the time. Now, a week before Christmas, the divorce proceedings were finally finalized between Bruce and Sylvia was looking forward to starting a new chapter of her life and put the marriage with Bruce behind her. However, now with everything set on Bruce's end, the guns, the Santa suit, a rough plan. This plan included going to the home of Sylvia's parents, who were Joseph and Alice Ortega, that lived in the town of Covina, California. Now, it turns out the Ortegas every year had hosted a Christmas Eve party where all of the family would get together for a fun night before Christmas the following morning. Now, when Christmas Eve of 2008 rolled around, the home of Joe and Alicia Ortega in Covina, California, was filled with family and children celebrating and visiting and having a good time. It was around 11:30 p.m. that night when their worlds would be changed forever. A blue Dodge Caliber sedan would pull into the cul-de-sac in which the Ortegas lived. Out of that blue Dodge Caliber would emerge Santa Claus. Now, a neighbor observed this from a neighboring house and thought the car was odd, but didn't think much when she saw Santa step out of the car. Perhaps the Ortegas had booked a Santa for that evening to surprise their kids. However, it was anything but that. The Santa, aka Bruce Pardo, would take a large package out of the car and walk towards the Ortega home. And while he did so, he actually waved to the neighbor next door and said something to the effect of either Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, and made his way to the Ortega's front door. The Ortega house was occupied with roughly 25 people, all in varying ages, from all different sides of the family. Some were upstairs, some were in the back living room watching TV, and many parents were in the living room playing a game of Texas Hold'em. When Bruce finally reached the door of the Ortega home, he knocked, and of course, the Ortega family inside kind of thought this whole incident was very strange, considering they weren't expecting any more visitors, and it was also really late at night. At this moment, Katrina, who was only 8 years old and was Sylvia's nephew, would answer the door. And, of course, Katrina's first instinct upon seeing Santa at the front door of the Ortega home was excitement. And she would be ecstatic to see someone like Santa standing at the Ortega's front door, but before the excitement could even dissipate, Bruce Pardo would pull a gun out from the gift he carried in his hands and pointed it at the young girl and pulled the trigger, shooting her right in the face. Bruce would then go on to spray bullets throughout the home. Many victims would hide under the dining room table and behind anything they could find. It was a panicked scene, as people were trying to find any way they possibly could to flee the home. Now, in some sources I did read when the carnage was happening, Bruce took his time to execute some of the victims that were hiding, perhaps most notably Joseph and Alicia, Sylvia's mother and father. When Bruce finished spraying bullets throughout the house, he reached back into his large gift and pulled out a homemade flamethrower-like device that was made through an air compressor and a gas tank. He then proceeded to drench the house in high-octane fuel. Now, this would actually go on to be Bruce's downfall in his entire plan. Now, after he was finished spraying this house with gasoline, when he went to light the flames, he must have overestimated how much fuel he truly used, because when he ignited the flames, they bursted and created a small explosion. This same explosion got so hot, it actually gave Bruce third-degree burns on parts of his body, causing the Santa suit he was wearing to partially burn into his skin, which is all sorts of nasty. As the intense fire raged on in the Ortega's home, it was time for Bruce to make his getaway. He took off the Santa suit and made way for his brother's house, Brad, who lived in Slimar. And I think I'm pronouncing that right. Slimar. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, somebody feel free to correct me there. He would make way to his brother Brad's house in Slimar, which is approximately 30 miles away. Now, Bruce was prepared to make a getaway, whether that was over the border to Mexico or back to Iowa to his friends, which he just visited. Now, of course, his friend in Iowa had no idea he was going to that Bruce was going to commit the atrocities that he did when Bruce actually contacted him and told him that he would be possibly returning so soon. And of course, he did that before this entire incident took place. However, when Bruce Pardo would reach the home of his brother Brad, who was not home at the time that he arrived, he would decide to end the spree by taking his own life by shooting himself. When Brad Pardo returned home later that night, he would discover the body of his brother Bruce. Word quickly got around that it was Bruce that committed the crimes at the Ortega family home, because even though he was wearing the Santa suit, Sylvia's sister Letitia said Bruce was easily recognizable underneath the costume and that it couldn't have been anyone else. Upon further investigation, it turns out the rental car Bruce had, the Dodge Caliber, was rigged with explosives. When the police searched the vehicle, they had found the Santa suit and more ammunition for his handguns. However, the Santa suit, or the remnants of it, the stuff that didn't burn to him, was actually rigged to a device that would ignite some black powder and explode the car if removed. Now, the police obviously discovered this and safely detonated the car, and no one was injured. Further investigation of Bruce's body revealed that he had actually strapped $17,000 in cash to his legs, meaning his plan was to flee, not kill himself. But of course, due to the quote-unquote horrific third-degree burns, and those are words from the police department, the police theorized he would have to ultimately seek treatment for these injuries, and if he did so, he would most certainly be caught. Another one of Bruce's rented vehicles would end up being found in Pasadena, in which the car contained getaway supplies, food, water, and maps of the United States and Mexico. Perhaps detailing another escape route in the instance, he did not take the flight to go to Iowa. Who knows if he even would have taken the flight to Iowa, or if that flight in its entirety was a red herring meant to mislead investigators. Now, another one of Bruce's getaway cars was actually stashed 500 feet away from the home of Scott Nord, who was Sylvia's divorce attorney. It is believed that if Bruce had not have killed himself in his brother's home, he would have ultimately killed Nord for his role in the messy divorce of him and Sylvia. Other sources I read also say that Bruce perhaps also had plans laid out to kill his own mother as well, as Bruce did not like how well she got along with Sylvia even after the divorce, and that his mother was actually supposed to attend the Ortega Christmas party that night, but did not end up going. When it was all said and done, the slaughter at the Ortega family home killed 9 people. Many of the bodies had to be ID'd after the fire, as some of the bodies were so badly burned they could only be identified through their dental records. Now, the victims would end up being Bruce's ex-wife, Sylvia Pardo, who was 43, Joseph and Alicia Ortega, Sylvia's parents, ages 80 and 70, Charles Ortega, who was Sylvia's brother, who was age 49, James Ortega, who was Sylvia's other brother, who was aged 51, Sherry Ortega, Sylvia's sister-in-law and the wife of Charles Ortega, was 45 years old, Teresa Ortega, Sylvia's other sister-in-law and wife of James Ortega, was 52, Alicia Ortega Ortiz, Sylvia's other sister, 46 years old, and Michael Ortiz, Alicia Ortega Ortiz's son, who was 17 years old. Now, the 8-year-old girl Katrina, who would be shot in the face from Bruce, would actually go on to survive the ordeal, and so would other members of the party who were injured. Some of them would actually suffered injuries just trying to escape the house and just that frantic panic that was going on, including someone actually jumping from a second-story window of the house to escape the gunshots and the fire. The Ortega family, devastated by the loss of their loved ones, would forever look at Christmas as a damper on the good times everyone is accustomed to having. However, that would not hold them down from making the best out of a bad situation. Every year, their daily Christmas travels would include a trip to the cemetery to visit the loved ones they lost on that fateful and tragic Christmas Eve. The tale of the Covina Christmas Massacre is a sick and twisted one that once again shows the evil lengths that humans can go to get revenge, or even just become a monster. Bruce Pardo was a sick man who used the cover of a joyful holiday to spread hate, and the Santa costume was a perfect example of that. I guess if anything, the biggest takeaway I want you to have from this episode is yes, of course, this is a seasonal episode for the Christmas season for me, but it is also a chance, a reminder even, to hold your loved ones a little tighter, just like you should every year. Even though there is no theories to this episode like I talked about before, I hope you all enjoyed this true crime Christmas from me, and I know it is very sad and it is unfortunate and beyond words at times what humans do to each other. However, the stories continue as stark reminders of what a mentally disturbed individual can do even on the year's most cheerful day. Again, this story in its entirety, very shocking. There are, of course, more details to this story, but it is a circumstance which is just very sad and disturbing, and I've said that before, but I truly mean it. There was a lot of instances in doing the research for this episode. At times, I just felt drained, because you're talking about somebody who is forever immortalized from an event where they had caused so much destruction and so much death in one family. And of course, even though the Ortega family makes the most out of Christmas every year, it's never ever going to be the same. It is forever scarred, and there's so many family members from the Ortega family that just did not deserve what happened to them that night. And again, my sincere condolences go out to the family of the Ortegas, because again, this story is, again, and I said it before and I'll keep saying it, just goes to show you the extent of what a twisted, sick human being can do to other people. And I know it's a little bit sad of an episode for Christmas, but I wanted to find a Christmas topic, and I went down the true crime rabbit hole, as sometimes I do, and I found this one, and I felt like you all should know it. Again, I think the biggest thing I took away from this is to maybe hug your loved ones a little bit longer, tell them that you love them, because that's what I took away from this, because this is a story that's just going to stick with me because of Christmas. I can't imagine anybody not liking Christmas, obviously the most joyful time of the year, and this entire tragedy is one that is going to haunt the Ortega family and the entire populace of Covina, California for possibly the rest of time. But with that being said, of course, that is going to do it for me for this kind of Christmas episode, this Christmas sponsored episode. By the time this episode goes out, it's probably going to be Christmas Eve, if not past Christmas Eve, or even past Christmas Day. So I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays. Hope everybody is doing well, and I appreciate the support as always. And again, that is going to do it for me today. I appreciate the support. I love it, and I can't get enough. So please keep doing your thing, listening to my content, commenting, subscribing, whether that's on Spotify, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's over on TikTok. I greatly appreciate it. Feel free to also send me topic suggestions. I know it is the time of gift giving. Send me a gift by giving me a topic suggestion you would like me to go into. You can send them to my email or Instagram direct message. My email is unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. And of course, my Instagram is just unblurringtheunknown. But with all that being said, that is going to do it today for me on this episode of the Covina Christmas Massacre. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as you could. A very sad topic for Christmas time. But again, it is a reminder to maybe cherish these times you have with your loved ones and to pull the joy out of everything that you can in life, while also simultaneously knowing that there are people out there like this and they deserve none of the recognition for their actions. They deserve none of it. They are evil, evil people. But not like us who listen to the show. All of you out there who listen to my show, you're probably great, great people. And again, I appreciate the support as always. And that is going to do it for me. Again, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I appreciate you tuning in, and I will see you all on the next one.